Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, another Omicron edition in your living room. But don't worry, we've got the pod squad here. We've got Katy, Maclean, Jillian joining us to break down all the latest in BC politics. Thank you for being here. Make sure you subscribe. Check us out on the Check Plus app for all the latest and last episodes as well. Let's get to our first topic, vaccine cards. We've had them for a few months now in BC. You got to show them to get into a restaurant, to get into a sporting event, to get into a movie theater to prove that you are vaccinated. They were set to expire, and this week Dr. Bonnie Henry extended them for 5 months until the end of June. We're going to go around and talk a bit about that. And on the one hand, I guess it's not a great sign that we have to extend them, but we're also right in the middle of the wave. And on the other hand, 5 months is a long time, all the way till June. It's hard to imagine that far into the future with all the ups and downs of COVID. So, Katy, why don't we go to you first on this? What do you think both of, the extension, and also we talked a lot last week about communications problems in the BC government. Did this communication, was it any better, or did you get any sense of if government has learned anything? And what do you think of the extension of the vaccine card?
Sure. So I think it would be useful to look back to what the privacy commissioner said about vaccine cards and passports last May. They indicated that there's obviously a substantial public benefit, but there's also a significant encroachment of civil liberties. And they had 3 criteria that they assigned. So, number one, they must be effective. Are they effective now? I think there is an argument, not really, given vaccinated people can spread Omicron so easily. However, were they successful in encouraging people to get vaccinated in the first place? Absolutely. The privacy commissioners indicated that the privacy risks must be proportionate. So far I would argue yes. And that they must be decommissioned once they're no longer necessary or effective. This one is key because Dr. Henry did indicate that we will be getting rid of them even before June, so definitely this year. And I think the fact that she confirmed that they will be gone means a brief extension to spring or summer is at its worst like a mild annoyance. There's infinitely more bothersome restrictions, for example, the mask mandate. So I thought that this was communicated effectively. I don't think it comes as a surprise, and I'm glad that they're going to be eventually gone.
It's a good point on the privacy commissioner. He's an independent watchdog. Government should listen to his advice. Unfortunately, this government has a track record of absolutely not listening to the privacy commissioner on things like FOI changes. They don't particularly give a hoot what he has to say. So whether they take that into account in making their public health decisions, I don't know. Maclean, what do you think of this?
I think the vaccine cards, which are not vaccine passports, we just learned, are different from some of the restrictions on things like gyms and schools, in which, in those cases, people are more finely attuned and keeping much closer track of what the expected end date was supposed to be. Gyms are going to be open again on this date. I can look forward to that. I can plan my business around it. I can plan my day around it. With the vaccine, I'm going to call it a passport, I don't get that sense. I think people thought it was this will be in place until we're told otherwise. And yes, obviously everyone would like to see the end of them, but I didn't get the sense that people were hanging on to the first end date. And Katy's points about what the privacy commissioner said are well taken. There will be diminishing returns on the usefulness and effectiveness in terms of encouragement and preventing infection. So hopefully before June, but I didn't get the sense that this was like the gyms being extended, the closures being extended another week.
Yeah, diminishing returns. I think you're right there. And remember, this extension, you don't qualify as you qualify as fully vaccinated with 2 shots. You don't need the booster dose to qualify as fully vaccinated. And right now, the province's efforts are on getting people boosted. So the vaccine card doesn't really encourage people to get the booster dose, which is where kind of government's efforts are right now as well. Jillian, what do you make of all this?
Well, I think, one thing that we haven't talked about is public opinion, and we saw with this issue, when it was first talked about, we saw public opinion slowly start to track up. Now it's, pretty much everybody who's vaccinated supports the vaccine cards. And not only that, they say and believe that it actually makes them feel safer doing things like going to restaurants. And I think that the government has an additional incentive to keep that confidence up with people as we're trying to, restart the economy and sort of get back to normal. So I think there's extra layers to this decision that could be feeding into the decision to potentially extend it.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting how the vaccine card has become kind of the flashpoint for the government, anti-authority people who view it as an overreach of the state into their lives and requiring them to have to show their vaccination and forcing them to get vaccinated to go to a restaurant or a bar. And I don't know if that pressure is something government feels when they decide what to do about the future of the vaccine card, or whether Dr. Henry takes it into account. A lot of the anti-vax protests that you go to are specifically designed, against the card, which people are quite upset about. So we'll see. There'll be a lot of pressure on government as well, because other countries like the UK and Denmark are pretty much abandoning their requirements, including masks and proof of vaccination, to do things. And how long before other countries follow suit? And there'll be pressure in BC in the months ahead to end this thing earlier if they can. And Dr. Henry has said she'll look at that. We want to go back to the topic of the BC Liberal leadership race. There is 1 week left until the vote on this race, and a victor who will be the next leader of the opposition and the person up against either Premier John Horgan or the next leader of the NDP in the next election. So it's an important race, an important decision that you will see the ramifications of if you're following BC politics in the months ahead. What is it, and we'll go around here on this, what is it that is happening in the last week of the race? What should be happening? What's going on inside the campaigns? What should the candidates be doing? Katy and Jillian led the last two successful leadership campaigns in the Liberals and the Greens, so we're going to go to them and ask them about it. But just to start with you, Maclean, on this, what do you think is going on, just so Katy and Jillian can tell you that you're wrong?
I'm going to give you a pile of cliches and mixed metaphors. Closing time, third and goal, bottom of the ninth with the goalie pulled. There's no more time left. That's what's happening with the leadership campaigns. All the focus beforehand was on the debates and things like selling new memberships. Those are in the rearview mirror now. So right now, if the campaigns are smart, they are devoting every last second of energy into connecting with the voters they have identified in the previous 300 days. And convincing them to put them first, or in some cases second, on their ballot. And maybe saying also, this other group, this other candidate, you should not put them on your ballot at all. So this is the convincing time. This is coffee is for closers. One more metaphor for you.
It's a lot of metaphors there.
I can give you more.
No, that's good. That's plenty. Remember, you can go back to our last week's show, especially the podcast, because we talked a bit about the Liberal voting system that they're using, the preferential ballot, and the pros and cons of that. There was a good discussion there. You can go back to Katy. What's going on? What would you be doing? What should people be thinking about when they're trying to figure out the last week of the race here?
There's three things that campaigns need to be doing. Number one, GOTV and number crunching. They got to secure their first ballot supporters and coordinate seconds and thirds where possible with some key organizers. Like, for example, Kevin is largely going to be focusing on his firsts. I think folks like Gavin and Val are probably going to be courting seconds and thirds. The second thing that you need to do, if you have oppo dirt, you have to launch it. We have heard a lot of allegations in this race, and so if folks have proof, you better get it out before voting opens. And then finally, solidifying your ballot proposition. So in 2018, ours was a vote for Andrew is a vote for integrity. Like, don't complicate it and say it 500 times this week to really motivate folks to get out and vote for you.
So just to follow that then, is it going to be a dirty week, do you think? Like, if there is dirt to fly out, is this the week that it's going to be flying out?
I can only speak to the last time, 2018. The last week was very intense. It was awful. Everyone hated me. I had launched some membership allegations that hadn't been proven yet, so I was working really hard to get that out. We had a couple longtime loyalists to Andrew quit in a huff on the last week of the campaign because they thought his last debate performance was too fiery. Everyone was burned out, exhausted, grumpy. But on a high note, everything changed. Right before the vote, we got our story out. We pushed an integrity message. Our GOTV was excellent, and we won. So this is going to be an emotional rainbow for everyone this week.
All right. Well, that'll be fun to cover in the week ahead, I guess. Jillian, what do you think's going on behind the scenes? What are people doing in their last week of this race?
Yeah, well, anyone who works on a campaign knows, like Katy said, the last week is always the hardest, tends to be the most vitriolic. People are exhausted. You're also dealing with people who are very competitive. They really want to win. They may have tried a lot of things throughout the campaign that didn't hit or didn't land, and they are starting to feel like they might be running out of time. I want to talk a little bit about what you don't want to do. And I think you don't want to get so desperate that you shoot yourself in the foot in terms of future political opportunities. At this stage in the campaign, you might be getting the sense that, you're not going to win, and it might be tempting to, try to grab attention, sway opinion by doing something dramatic. I think we saw this with Renee Merrifield. She put out a campaign email, talking about the trucker convoy that's headed to Ottawa, talking about how we, need to think about the place of vaccine mandates in causing disunity, which is obviously an incredibly sensitive issue with this going on. It's since emerged that the organizers of the trucker convoy have, very sketchy ties to Western separatist movements and other dubious movements. And I think, she proceeded to get into Twitter war with Jazz Johal. And I think that, it's a really good reminder that your career in politics doesn't end with just one election. Many people run lots of times before they win, even as leader. Like we might see that play out with Kevin Falcon. And, to keep your eyes on the long-term prize and not just the vote next week.
Yeah, that was quite a social media controversy over the last few days with what you mentioned, Renee Merrifield, appearing to, support that trucker convoy, Jazz Johal accusing her of playing footsie with the anti-authority, anti-vax kind of sentiment that's out there, that crowd that some politicians are kind of trying to appear supportive of when it suits their purpose, but not quite when the backlash becomes too much. And that convoy has apparently turned into a bit of a also racist kind of convoy as well, which is we're not entirely sure how it's going to play out, but it's hard to see politicians wanting to get involved in that. And then also, I think Renee did a CBC interview in which she said some things about, deaths being a part of life at this time of year, given the flu in the past, which I'm not sure landed. It was very similar to John Horgan's comments about deaths being part of life in the heat dome, which he was roundly criticized for, and some other comments. We've talked about Renee on the show in the past. I've said there are some concerns about her judgment and her leadership qualities because of that judgment, and I'm not sure this was the greatest performance for her in the last few days. I don't think a lot of people were shaking their heads. I don't know. An example of maybe not what to do, Maclean, what did you make of that?
I think that you're right in that obviously it's the wrong kind of attention, and that anyone who's trying to appeal or appear like they're linked in any way to the trucker convoy is making a grievous error right now. I think if she was on the show, Renee Merrifield would probably say something to the effect of, this was being willfully misinterpreted, isolated things I said are being blown out of context and out of all proportion. And to which, if I was giving her advice, I'd say, okay, well, let's grant that's the case, just for the sake of argument. This has happened a couple times now. And so you have, at a certain point, you either have to start blaming people for misinterpreting you or start changing up your game so that you're not, baiting the trap yourself. And if this was a one-time isolated incident, sure, this happens to everyone, politicians included. We've all been misinterpreted on social media. But once it becomes a pattern, then it's time to look at what the one consistency is there.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the question, to go back to Jillian's earlier point, is does that influence your future in politics? Does it change your position within a caucus or under a future leader or whatever, when those kind of things continue to be a problem for the party and the brand and the caucus and that type of thing? Katy, what do you make of all this?
So I agree. I think it's a strategic error for anyone to align themselves with this particular protest group. And I would provide the same advice in that I think it would be a strategic error for the NDP to align themselves with Extinction Rebellion, or the Greens to associate themselves with the Rainforest Flying Squad. This movement is not representative of the trucking industry as a whole. It is a small group of anti-vax loonies, quite frankly. I want to be a little bit thoughtful and reflective on Renee, or communications as a whole, really. I think here in BC, we do have a tendency to rush to the center, to immediately kind of deem one narrative as the only acceptable narrative, and all others are dangerous, immoral, and wrong. And I noticed that this is a bit different than Alberta, where, quite often, two highly polarized narratives develop with equal weight behind them. And that's just a comment on the differences between the two provinces in the media environment. But with this in mind, if you're in this province, communications have to be very deliberate, carefully crafted, and executed quite strategically. You cannot have the appearance of being glib or flippant on issues, especially ones that are ideologically loaded. And so, presumably Renee and her team have data showing that these messages are appealing to a particular demographic. I would be curious to see that. But as Maclean noted, as all of you have noted, like this has happened on more than one occasion. And so I would just, if I were her and her team, think about, how you want to be viewed long term after this race is over.
Yeah, it certainly creates an opening that other parties can use, your opponents to their advantage. The NDP have jumped all over comments from Renee in the past and continued to do it again this time. So it certainly, there's a much larger impact, I think, that frustrates some other leadership contenders, other people in caucus who go, oh no, not again. Don't give your opponents an inch unless you want them to take it and kind of come back at you. So I think that's a future problem for a future leader of the party to try and figure out what to do to prevent that from being a recurring issue that the NDP are able to exploit, and vice versa. That there are new Democrats that the Liberals are able to kind of watch online and just wait until they say something and jump on it as well. So we'll see what happens there. I guess in our next show, it'll be essentially kind of just on the eve of the leadership race that is occurring and the kind of the votes on that weekend. So we'll maybe touch kind of a little bit on it, but we'll do a more fulsome discussion of it after the results are known and we can kind of go into how the race played out and that type of thing. On our final topic here, I want to do a grab bag. So I want to go around the table. We've done this before where we're just going to ask the Pod Squad what the top issues were that we haven't discussed so far this week and maybe comment a bit about those because there's a lot going on out there. Katy, you want to start us off?
Yeah, so we've touched on this, but I think it's the biggest issue in the country right now, and that is on truckers. And, I think it's worth noting that truckers as a whole, they deserve our gratitude for working so hard through this pandemic, through fires, through floods, to get goods to stores and put food on our table. And so thank a trucker in your life. But this particular convoy is not representative of the entire industry. This is just a group of anti-vaxxers who happen to drive trucks. So I find it's frustrating when really a hardworking group of people, 90% of whom are vaccinated, are unfortunately being painted with this extremist brush. And so, I just wanted to say thank you, trucker.
Yeah. What do you make of how it's sort of played out federally? I mean, politicians have been falling over themselves not to associate themselves with it. The federal conservatives have sort of been there. The PPC is all over it and marching for it. How challenging must it be for politicians to navigate that federally as well?
Extremely, because I don't think that folks understood what this particular group really stood for when they started supporting the trucking industry as a whole and expressing concern about widespread vaccine mandates. I imagine folks are going to be waiting with bated breath, over the next few days, to hope and pray that no violence breaks out, that a cop doesn't get punched, that somebody doesn't get shot, because aligning yourself with this type of extremist group on the right or the left is extraordinarily precarious. And I think perhaps if folks had a chance to do it over, they wouldn't have.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Maclean, what's on your mind this week? Anything jumping out at you?
The BC Court of Appeal delivered a really stunning and comprehensive reversal of a previous ruling about the Rainforest Flying Squad, which is the group protesting at Fairy Creek. In this ruling, it was almost a complete wiping out of the previous ruling that said, and saying now that no, this group cannot just brazenly continue breaking the law and say they will continue breaking the law and get their way. And the previous ruling erred on a number of fronts, including talking about the police using excessive force being a factor in the ruling, which is unfortunate, but the reality it is as it is now. And essentially that highlighting some more of the unusual aspects of the Flying Squad, which is, I learned things like they've been resupplying by helicopter, which is astonishing, actually. And so it remains to be seen how this will affect the protests this year. They're mostly gone because of the cold, but they don't have the legal backing that it looked like they might have just a few months ago.
Yeah, this is all centered around an injunction which Teal Jones, the logging company, obtained to kind of remove the protesters so that they could log, and the protesters defying that, and the RCMP getting called in to enforce the injunction, and that turning into a bunch of viral videos of alleged, overuse of force. and then the Supreme Court in BC saying it was concerned about its reputation because of the way the RCMP were enforcing the injunction and refusing to extend it, and then that ending up in the top court, Maclean, as you mentioned, throwing all that back out and saying it's not the court's problem how the RCMP are handling things. There's ways to complain about that. This is about kind of the rule of law and peace and order, and that was the ruling from the Court of Appeal. I don't know if the war in the woods, as this has become known, starts again in the spring when the weather improves, but if it does, it'll be harder for that to continue without, with the courts having staked a kind of clear position on this. So that was a fascinating one this week as well, for sure. Jillian, what's jumping out at you?
What I've been watching is this sort of percolating issue of the province stepping in to expedite housing zoning in local governments. I think it's really interesting because it shows how quickly things can change politically. I think, slow-moving development has been an issue in local housing, especially in jurisdictions like Vancouver, for a really long time. But it's also been very politically difficult to deal with because, these developments can be very politically contentious in their communities, and politicians worry about that come election time. But we've seen both the BC Liberal candidates for leadership and the housing minister talk about the need for the province to step in and basically expedite zoning because municipalities aren't moving fast enough. And I think it's very interesting. It's an indication of how much pressure the parties are feeling to move on this. And it's going to be really interesting to see if it works.
What do you make, Jillian, of the fact that the housing minister intends to bring legislation in around this front, but he's going to do it after the municipal election? So there won't be much of there'll be a conversation about it in the municipal election, but not necessarily about what BC is going to do about it. It'll be an interesting time.
Yeah, I think it both avoids, this becoming a lightning rod for sort of NIMBY parties to rally against in the municipal elections, but also gives some political cover to, potential allies for the provincial government who want to see more density, because folks that support that want to see zoning move faster, see development move faster, know that something's coming, and it just kind of turns down the heat in general on the issue for the local elections.
Yeah, it's an interesting file. I mean, the province has signaled it intends to take the heat on trying to move projects through so that the local governments don't get taken over by those NIMBY forces and all the projects rejected when density needs to increase housing supply. So that'll be a big story near the end of this year for sure. All right, well, we covered a lot there, and we will be back next week in your pod box and on Check TV, on Check Plus. Make sure you subscribe to get the latest, and thank you so much for joining us this week on Political Capital.